In recent news, a new space engine, nicknamed the helical engine, was developed by the engineering team at NASA. This engine is revolutionary as it could potentially fly all across the cosmos using absolutely no fuel at all. This engine works by accelerating ions in a sort of spring structure, which can result in speeds never seen before by humans, and it's even said to break the very laws that make up what we know about physics. However, with these massive advancements in space travel, technology has raised some ethical questions. Why do we keep astronauts in space for such a long and extended period of time? How do we keep them healthy and stop their bodies degrading due to the change of environment? And what effects are imposed on the human mind, and how can they be minimized? So, what are the most significant effects of spaceflight on the human body, and how can they be minimized? So, what are the impacts of being physically impaired in such an unforgiving environment? Being healthy in space may be a lot more important than what first meets the eye. Of course, it is desirable to keep an astronaut alive for obvious reasons, but it's also imperative that an astronaut may be operating at their full potential and at a level which they're expected to be. Evidence from the NASA Science Mission Directive shows that the heart is known to grow lazy in space and inefficient when gravity isn't pressuring it to keep pumping blood around the body. Furthermore, NASA research goes to explain side effects of decreased heart activity. These include decreased bone marrow output and blood rushing to either the brain or feet. This rushing of blood can cause trauma and even strokes or heart attacks. This is as the body mostly relies on gravity to pump blood throughout the heart. According to the Canadian Space Agency Institute of Space Health and Safety, an impaired heart, low blood temperature, and compromised replenishment through bone marrow can severely diminish the extent of which an astronaut can function effectively. This may subject the human to side effects such as fainting and damaged vision. These effects are very long-lasting and could compromise the safety and integrity of a whole mission. It is so dangerous, and we know so little about the impacts on the body, that even Andrew Coronois, a mechanical engineer of more than 20 years, stated that in an interview he would not feel comfortable with today's technology to embark on an elongated mission to somewhere in the solar system. Coronois goes on to bring up the unsolved issue of excessive radiation exposure due to the penetrative nature of gamma rays emitted from the cosmos. This is as daunting as it is harmful. The Canadian Space Agency's sector of nuclear radiation argues that gamma radiation is able to breach a spaceship's body as the gamma ray particles can travel at the speed of light. It takes only 3 or 4 inches of lead to stop this. However, alarming amounts of radiation can still penetrate. However, according to the Australian Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, gamma radiation is not an uncommon force to encounter. Gamma radiation emanate from commonly encountered items such as smoke detectors and sterilized medical equipment in hospitals. Gamma radiation exposure is a pressuring issue within the space industry that needs to be figured out. The gamma radiation exposure on the moon is more than double of the International Space Station, while the radiation exposure levels on Mars are around 3 times greater than that of the ISS. On the topic of health, the sterile environment of space does lead to many astronauts feeling quite healthy. Astronaut Andrew Thomas stated that after 7 months of being in space, before these exercise devices were developed, such as tethered equipment on the ground, he quoted this:
"My physical health in space was probably better than it was on the ground."
However, this does not consider the massive impact space has on bone density. Research from the US National Institute of Health in a 2013 study found that bones receive a very limited supply of blood, and they rely on exercise to increase blood temperature and pressure, which, during exercise, brings more blood to the bones, making them work more efficient as they're replenishing bone marrow and blood cells. However, in space, this function is limited, but of course, there are some outliers. He also went on to talk about how there were no bugs or viruses in space, so Andrew Thomas's overall health was almost enhanced in a vacuum that is space. This was surprising to hear, as space researchers have found that 1 to 1.2% of minerals in the bone are lost every month spent in space. This is constant, nor exponentially diminishing in density. It was observed by NASA recovery crews receiving astronauts upon their return that the astronauts were especially susceptible to fractured bones upon re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere and the Earth's gravitational pull. This is as bones and muscles have been weakened due to lack of use, and these parts of the body have almost acclimatized to the conditions in space. Osteoporosis is a common condition that permanently decreases the quality of the skeletal system. This condition is found quite commonly in retired astronauts. This condition is almost undetectable as it shows no symptoms until the first fracture occurs. This decrease in bone density has a massive impact on the bodily coordinations of an astronaut. However, with recent studies and new meal plans developed by NASA, meals with high nutrient value paired with highly refined workout plans have lowered the rates of this condition to an exceptional degree. And it really is dinner with a heck of a view. Speaking of the view, being in the mere presence of space can have a profound effect on a human being. The overview effect is one that gives someone a usually pessimistic perspective on Earth and life. People who have seen the Earth from space with the naked eye, such as Andrew Thomas, have a record of developing depression as they have reported to start having an overwhelming sense of worthlessness and insignificance. Laurie Meggs, a NASA ISS payloads communicator, described this as a man's cry from being separated from Mother Earth. Space travel as a whole has been described as having mind-altering effects, such as hallucinations. Free-moving subatomic particles that are emitted from dying stars are free-moving in the vacuum space. On Earth, most of these particles are absorbed by our atmosphere. However, when astronauts are exposed to a large amount of these subatomic particles, it produces the dancing fairy effect. This effect is a hallucination where the subatomic particles stimulate the optical nerves in the eye, which produces flashing light in the vision of an astronaut, even when their eyes are closed. Astronauts may also become irritated or uncomfortable from being in a repetitive, confined space for such a prolonged period of time. Confinement, mixed with the stresses and waiting of day-to-day jobs, has a large impact on the psychological health of an astronaut. This is in addition to the already impaired attention spans, task-switching abilities, bodily coordination, and problem-solving capabilities. Vaughn Bell was the recipient of a 2012 Erickson Institute Prize for Excellence in the Mental Health Media. He's also regarded to be as one of the most well-known and respected neuropsychologists in the world. With his research within NASA, he found that hallucinations that many astronauts suffer in space, paired with the impending sense of isolation, have a drastic effect on the integrity of a mission. The stresses that accompany spaceflight have a large weighting when determining whether a mission will be successful or not. There's even a cool new name for it: space madness. A trial called the Mars 500, conducted by NASA in 2011, spanned over 520 days, which was to test the mental strength of astronauts and how they would cope in new environments such as Mars. These astronauts would be expected to experience new sensations living in microgravity for extended periods of time and being in confined spaces with accomplices for longer than a year. The experiment found that those deemed more irritated and affected by crew members were the major source of discomfort and unrest for the team. Now you may be thinking, these effects on spaceflight are so bad, how can they be neutralized or at the very least minimized? Well, space scientists specifically hired by NASA are on the track to completely eradicating these effects. This is through the practice of tethering various gym equipment, such as treadmills, dumbbells, and leg presses. The tethering of equipment simulates a weight-bearing exercise, similar to the ones on Earth, as the body does not need to weight bear at all in space. It is essential to the astronaut's well-being that they persist with these weight-bearing exercises to ensure a smooth transition back to the Earth's atmospheric pressure once again. Variants of nutritional but commonly consumed items are paramount to an astronaut's health and well-being. These meals include dehydrated fruit bowls with ice cream, spaghetti bolognese, and stew. This was a massive leap from the first Apollo astronauts who didn't even have access to hot water. In fact, these astronauts often complain that the food was unappetizing and they disliked the food they were provided for the mission. That feedback had initiated change. The psychological effects of spaceflight are kept to a minimum through extensive and thorough training. The NASA astronaut training program incorporates classes, space survival training, and testing to determine at the end of its 2-year period whether a student will be fit to endure the conditions of space. There are many ways shown that are designed to cope with the added complication, with the unity that provides strength with this common goal of one day bettering humanity. What isn't possible?